Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the session on sunrise sectors in Southeast Asia. So I'm very pleased to be speaking this morning to Sandhya Sriram. She's the CEO and co-founder of Shiok Meats, the startup setting out to cultivate seafood and meat from cells. Now, Sandhya started the company with fellow stem cell biologist Ling Kai in Singapore. Now, they've made siu mai with shrimp cultured from cells and have just announced lab cultured lobster in gazpacho, a world first. In another novel sector, we have Kuldeep Singh Rajput, who founded Biofourmis in Singapore. He has since relocated his headquarters to Boston, a veritable biotech hub. Biofourmis focuses on what it calls personally predictive care, using patient-specific data and analytics to try and prevent medical episodes and improve patient outcomes. Biofourmis has also adapted their platform to the COVID pandemic. And their system is being used in hospitals to monitor patients remotely. Now, both startups are creating something new and with major impact. I'm going to start with a question that applies to both of you. Maybe Sandhya, you can start first. What are the key challenges that you're looking to solve?
Sure. So as you mentioned, we are a cell-based seafood company. What I mean by that is we grow seafood and meats using stem cells. So this reduces the use of animals or growing entire animals for many years or many months, and then killing them to eat only parts of them. So what we do is only grow the part of the animal that we consume. So if you take a piece of beef, we don't grow the entire cow. We just grow the part of the animal, which is a steak or a part of the meat that we consume. So we specifically work on shrimp and lobster and crab as well, so crustaceans. So we don't grow the shell, the head, the eyes, and the tail, and so on. What we grow is the meat inside. What we are aiming to overcome, or what is the challenge that we're seeing nowadays, is the whole fishing industry facing a lot of issues, from overfishing to unsustainable fishing to setting up a lot of shrimp and crab farms that are really hard to actually set up. And there are a lot of issues with diseases that are caused in these animals that are wiping out shrimp farms. Um, Issues with the consumers that they've brought up is their meat really nutritious? Does it have antibiotics injected into them or used in them, and so on? So what we are trying to offer is a sustainable, more nutritious protein and food supply for the future. At the same time, we are going to be 10 billion in population in the next 20 to 30 years. So we definitely need more food supply chains, more access to protein and food for the entire world. And that's exactly what Shiok Meats does.
Hmm. Kuldeep, what about Bioformis then? What is it that why are you doing so important?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think if you look at, the app store today, there are 50,000, health apps in the market. Patients don't know what to do with it. Clinicians don't know what to make of, and payers don't know what to pay for. And there's this whole lack of legitimacy in data. And as over 70% of our entire population is living with, a chronic condition. And with the aging, population significantly increasing, the need for really managing patients at home becomes critical. And with this COVID-19 pandemic, patients are expecting hospital level care into patients' home rather than going into the hospital, multiple times. And what we do at Biofourmis is we are really pioneering this entire new category of medicine. If you look at 50 years ago, there was small molecules, biologics, cell gene therapy, and then there's this whole new era over the past few years on how do you just use software, which is technically your app, to treat and manage a disease. You can look at this digital therapy like or akin like a drug. If you have a drug in the market, let's say for patients with heart failure, the drug has indication which technically says that the drug has ability to improve functional capacity or quality of life in patients. But how do you achieve that same efficacy claims by just using a software? As we are talking about heart failure, one of the biggest clinical unmet need is that in the US or even worldwide, less than 1% of patients are on optimal dosage, and less than 20% of these patients receive guideline-directed medication therapy. So what we really do is we have built our first digital therapy, which uses data captured from patients using sensors and patient app. We use AI and machine learning techniques to really be able to, predict heart failure episodes, which clinicians, really didn't do so far. It's super complicated, and machines have that ability really to detect. And we have clinically validated it to detect almost a couple of weeks in advance. But once you do that, what do you do next? So that's where the whole concept of using software to intervene comes into play, where we automatically optimize dosage, optimize therapy directly to the patient, so that we can achieve exactly the same level of outcomes, what a drug would have done. And just to put it in layman words, if you look at a digital therapy, it follows the exact same process like a drug, right? FDA looks at it as a digital therapy. It goes through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials, and you need to validate both clinical as well as economic benefits. And that's how we look at different disease areas. And as a company, we have been primarily focused on cardiovascular, respiratory, and oncology as our core, therapeutic areas. And for every disease, we look at what is the core clinical unmet need and how we can use monitoring and data to really drive better outcomes in patients.
I mean, having said that, though, what is the biggest misconception about your business, Kuldeep? And how have you set to put it right? I mean, are you a device company, for example?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And that's a challenge which most of the digital therapeutics companies face, right? When you go to the FDA, you can't go to the FDA with a medical device or a software as a medical device, because you're not just that. If you go to the FDA, and have these kind of treatment claims, but you're not a drug. And these are two different divisions within FDA, and you're something in between. And many regulatory agencies are trying to learn, how to regulate such products, how to approve, such products. And I think what we have done, or I would say some misconceptions really, first of all, or I wouldn't say misconception, but healthcare is complicated. You're not going to be able to just have a product, just build it and get it out into the market, and the adoption really is not going to be high, regardless. It's in that spectrum of wellness to illness, right? You need to really be able to go out there with evidence, with claims around your clinical benefits as well as your economic benefits to really drive that adoption. So I think when you look at a digital therapeutics company, it's, I would say, more like a biotech company, right? Where we follow all the CGMP standards, quality systems, regulatory processes akin like a pharma company, and build products with agility like a technology company. And really by doing that and generating these kind of evidence helps you scale in different disease areas, and also creates that comparative advantage or barrier to entry for anyone else. Because if somebody else wants to come out with a product in that specific disease area, it's going to take them 5 years, and really to go through that process and even get clearance by the FDA.
What about you, Sandhya? Biggest misconception about Shiok? I think you may have to explain Shiok for the benefit of some members of our audience.
Sure. Just to start off with the name, I think Shiok actually means delicious and fantastic in Singapore Malay slang, hence the name for the company, Shiok Meats. And it's generally used as an expression for delicious food, or if you're looking very nice, then we just say, you look Shiok today, or if a cup of noodles is really good, then you go like, it's Shiok. So that's kind of how it's used, and hence the name. But Again, to explain in very simple terms as to what we do, we grow meat and seafood using stem cells. So at the end of the production process, what you get is actual meat and seafood. It is not fake or synthetic or artificial. We use the stem cells, we put them in a controlled environment to make them grow into the meat that you're used to eating. But what happens is this is a sustainable process. It requires very less land, water, and energy use. It is still meat, so it's still delicious, nutritious, and so on, but it doesn't have the issues of heavy metals or microplastic accumulation or antibiotic use that is seen in traditional farming nowadays. The challenges that we have faced, as I'm talking about it, I can hear the questions or the comments that we used to get from people was, are you mock meat? First thing. The second is, are you like Impossible or Beyond or Omnipork, which are plant-based meats that are out there? So the answer to both is no. We are not mock meat because we are actual meat, but without killing of an animal, without extracting it from a fully grown animal. We are not like Impossible or Beyond or Omnipork, because what those companies do is make meat that feel, look, taste like meat, but are made completely from plants. So it is mock meat, but it is made to feel, look, and taste like meat or seafood. In our case, we are actual meat, so we make it using stem cells. How I like to equate this is when you take a piece of meat that you are used to eating nowadays, when you break it down or when you cut it open, what you see is muscle, fat, connective tissue, blood, which is all made up of cells and stem cells from the animal. So what we do is we take out those stem cells, and stem cells have this amazing capability to grow outside of the animal's body. So we exploit that capability of these animals. We put them in a super clean, controlled environment, feed them food grade edible ingredients so that these cells eventually form the same muscle, fat, connective tissue, and blood that we are used to eating in a piece of meat. You can think of it like a greenhouse where we actually take a small cutting of a plant, we put it in a controlled environment where you control the temperature, the humidity, the sunlight, all of it. And at the end of the process, you get real fruits, vegetables, and plants that we eat on a daily basis. So similar to that, we take a small sample of stem cells and we grow them in a very controlled environment. So our manufacturing facility essentially looks like a brewery with large stainless steel tanks. But instead of beer, it's meats that's growing inside of these equipment. And at the end of a couple of weeks, what you get is real shrimp, crab, and lobster meat. So those are some of the challenges in terms of perception or consumer, awareness of the product. Other than that, of course, there are challenges, everything from the cost of it to the scale up to fundraising and all of it.
So not I was going to say not suitable for vegetarians then.
Exactly. So we cannot call this vegan or vegetarian, but I won't say not suitable for vegetarians. So for example, I have been a vegetarian all my life, but for choice, in terms of, it was more ethical and environmental reasons for me to not eat meat or seafood. But I do enjoy Shiok meats because I know it's guilt-free, it's ethical, it is real meat and seafood, but doesn't come from a dead animal. So I am okay with it. So it depends on what kind of a vegetarian or a vegan you are and why you are vegetarian or vegan.
Okay. So, I mean, having sort of been up and running for 18 months or more, I'm just wondering for you, Sandhya, what sort of changes or adjustments have you had to make, So for example, I think one of the things you mentioned was costs, and I think you had a timeline to make it more commercially palatable in terms of costs, but I think timeline has shifted a bit for you.
Sure. We've actually been in operation for 2.5 years. So we started in August 2018. No, that's okay. August 2018. So about 2.5 years. We are on track to reduce our pricing by the end of next year. So we're hopefully looking to launch our product in 2022. So that time it will be affordable. It'll still be premium priced given the fact that it's sustainable, clean, and healthy. But it is something that most of the people can afford. can go into a restaurant and like order Shiok shrimp dumplings or Shiok lobster, whatever dish it is, and they can actually afford it and consume it. So that's kind of what we're looking towards. One of the key I would say, price additions to our process is the controlled medium in which we grow our cells. So the cells essentially grow in a nutrient broth or a soup of sorts. We call it media in scientific language, but essentially it's a mix of carbohydrates, proteins, amino acids, vitamins, minerals that is required for these cells to grow. And right now, this medium is only being manufactured by pharmaceutical companies, and it's not edible. It's not inexpensive. It's actually very expensive. So that adds on to a lot of the cost. So what we have been doing is trying to swap out each of these chemical ingredients with more food grade and plant-based ingredients. So for example, if you take shrimp, they grow in the ocean and they eat algae and seaweed and the other plants that are there. So we take extracts of these plants and grow our cells in those extracts. So that's how we bring the price point down, make the whole product safe and edible for human consumption. So it takes a while to get to that price point. So just give us a little bit of time to get to the, we are aiming at a somewhere between $50 to $60 per kilogram price point when we launch. And that'll happen in the next 8 to 10 months.
I was going to ask both of you also, how has the whole pandemic affected your operations or your plans, or actually maybe in the case of Kuldeep, accelerated your company's plans?
Yeah, absolutely. I think even though the pandemic was unfortunate, it has been sort of a silver spoon, not just for Biofourmis but entire digital health, right? Patients, were very skeptical to come back to the hospitals. There were multiple challenges, right? Starting with the patient, where they didn't want specifically to go back to the hospital, so hospitals had to figure out how do you bring that acute level care or hospital level care into patients' home. The second was, as the COVID-19, cases were going high, and we saw that huge surge multiple times in different countries, and even seeing it till today, hospitals just don't have the bandwidth to manage patients and take care of patients all in hospitals. So really building out strategies on how do you bring that care outside the hospital. So technically, in the US, many hospitals initially, I would say in Q1, started to impose telemedicine and started to use video calls, video consultation. However, I think very quickly, especially in the US, people started realizing, or clinicians especially, that just video calls, especially for complex disease patients, was not so effective, because clinicians are actually used to provide clinical care. It would work for certain disease areas. Let's say you have a cough or a fever, you have skin allergy, etc. But if you have a patient with respiratory condition, patients undergoing chemoradiation therapy, that's when we started to see a significant rise in Q2 onwards in digital technologies or remote monitoring technologies, where patients were monitored. Clinicians were using data to guide intervention in conjunction with telemedicine when they were having these video calls. So certainly from that, the market, I would say, has fast forwarded by almost 10 years now. And for any digital health company within this field. On top of that, I think regulatory agencies, payers started being more cooperative. So we saw emergency approval for many products in different countries, including Asia. Telemedicine was never reimbursed at this scale. Started to get reimbursed in the US, where CMS started paying for telemedicine and remote monitoring technologies, and clinicians were actually getting paid, and that's where we saw a significant adoption from clinicians. And of course, to Biofourmis, that was a real boost to our main business of managing patients with CV, respiratory oncology, and keeping them out of hospital and back home. However, what we primarily did, and it was, I would say, a very good timing. Earlier this year in Jan, we published, our first clinical study to manage patients with respiratory condition, patients undergoing acute respiratory distress syndrome, where we demonstrated, almost 70% reduction in hospitalization, 38% reduction in overall cost of care. And as you know, when the pandemic hit, we know that COVID-19 is a respiratory illness and has impact, on your respiratory system, along with other, conditions. And we were able to very quickly, shift. And since our platform was modularized, we were able to quickly put together a platform to, monitor and manage patients with COVID-19. So over the past, I would say 6 to 8 months, we had to ramp up our manufacturing of our sensors by almost 20% or 20 times. We managed over 50,000 COVID-19 patients, in 4 different countries, were commissioned by the governments, to monitor and manage patients undergoing, quarantine, but also those infected with COVID-19 who were isolated. And we have seen fantastic results in some countries where, using our technology, really being able to, predict COVID-19 worsening events up to, 21 hours in advance, enabling clinicians to intervene early, as well as you start to see the surge of COVID-19. It becomes very important for hospital systems to allocate their resources properly. And one other thing, what we really were able to do is use that inpatient or in-hospital data from patients to really detect or predict if the patient is going to worsen or improve, and estimate the average length of the stay of the patient, so that patients could potentially even be discharged early, so that a new patient who requires actual care, can be catered to. So certainly, the market has fast forwarded. COVID-19 has accelerated adoption of digital health, not just remote monitoring, telemedicine, but even, digital therapies, right? With the reimbursement guidelines, FDA releasing enforcement discretion guidelines to get these digital therapies, out in the market pretty soon.
Mm. Sandhya, so in terms of the pandemic for you, though, food security, I think, has become more imperative with the disruption in supply chains. So how has that impacted interest in what you do?
Yeah, I think as Kuldeep mentioned, even though COVID is very unfortunate, it has been a good side for us. I would say good impact for us, in the sense that I think food supply and food security have, been brought up a lot during this period. Even being in a developed country like Singapore, I still remember walking into the supermarket and not finding the brand that I'm used to buying in a certain product. And I was like, my God, even in a country like Singapore, the whole food supply chain has kind of broken because of this pandemic. That is, first world problems for me, but, thinking about the other countries and the access to protein and food and all the articles that we've been reading on it has kind of raised an alarm in everybody's brains. Also, the fact that COVID, originally originated from a meat market or a seafood market, was also kind of at the back of everybody's head. So I think that's kind of made everybody think about food and where it comes from, how it's made, what product am I buying, what am I eating, what am I cooking, all of it. And I think during the lockdown, everybody started cooking a lot more, honestly. We couldn't go out to eat. I'm talking about the entire world. Entire world ended up cooking a lot more. And that meant you were actually going and buying the ingredients either online or in a supermarket. You actually turned the product around to see what it was made up of, what goes into it, where it was made, and all of that. So people have started thinking a lot about alternative proteins right now, plant-based, cell-based meats. A lot of questions, enthusiasm, and interest in these products. So that has helped further accelerate our consumer education and creating consumer awareness. With regards to our operations, it did slow us down a little bit because we couldn't be in our R&D facility 100%. Thankfully, the Singapore government allowed us to keep it open during even the lockdown period. So we did have some of our scientists go in and work in shifts or turns and so on. Of course, we had to maintain safe distancing and all of that. We still are doing that. We are back to 100% operation, but we do take turns working in the lab. So I would say that kind of has affected our progress to an extent, but definitely keeps us going as much as we can. And I think now it's a lot more push for us to commercialize our products soon, within the next 2 years.
Sandhya, I also wanted to ask you though, I mean, you left sort of the medical application of what you've been trained in for food. I mean, what made you decide to do that? How do you decide that this is more important than, you know, the medical applications?
Sure. So up to 2018, I was on the biomedical side of things. So I used to work on stem cells for human therapy and disease prevention and disease, treatment and so on. So I used to work literally on the bench working with human stem cells till about 2016. And then around 2016, I realized that a lot of the research that we do as scientists in these labs eventually never see the day of light. Statistics have shown that only 10% of all the work that's being done actually convert into products. It's either the issue with regulatory versus funding versus what the university's ultimate aim is, taking these research out of the lab and into a commercial product. And it took too many years for a therapy for diseases to come out. And by the time that disease was probably too outdated, by the time the therapy came out, we were seeing that happening. And I'm glad that, digital therapeutics has come up because that speeds up the process. So I completely believe in what Biofourmis and Kuldeep does. And I was a big, supporter of all of these. I am a big supporter of all of these kind of new innovative technologies for healthcare. But for me, I think in my heart and my brain, I was like, in my lifetime at least, I am pretty young, but in my lifetime at least, I want to see something that I've worked on become a product, and I want to see it creating an impact. I've always been a lover of nature, animals, and environment, but I wasn't really doing anything about it other than being a vegetarian probably, and maybe growing a bit of my own vegetables and plants at home. But I felt I wanted to kind of create a huger impact. And 2014, 2015, I came across cell-based meats, and it just hit home and ticked all of the boxes for me, given the fact that I don't eat meat because of ethical reasons and environment reasons. Given the fact that I'm a stem cell scientist, I can understand the technology and how it's done and how it's made. But 2016, I went into the business side of science. So I actually learned on the job as how to budget, how to raise money, how to commercialize, how to take out a biotech product into the market. So Shiok Meat sits in the midst of biotech and food tech. So we are kind of in the middle, again, like Kuldeep, the regulators are a bit confused as to who needs to regulate this, how they want to regulate this, because we aren't on the meat side, production side, we aren't exactly on the biotech side, we're in the middle of it. So in the US, it's going to be FDA and USDA who are going to regulate this. So it's going to be two big governing bodies looking at one particular product. So I would say we are in the middle of a lot of things. But what it does is create impact, sustainable and nutritious food for all of us in the future. So that made me smile when I thought about it and made me very excited. So I said, okay, let's leave medical miracles or medical technology and treatments to the other scientists that are out there. My calling is going to be on the food tech side of things. So I quickly kind of jumped onto cell-based meats.
Right. Kuldeep, I wanted to ask you, one of the biggest events for Biofourmis recently, at least from an outsider's perspective, is the Series C that you raised in September with 100 million with backing from SoftBank under Vision Fund 2. I mean, could you just take us through the process, the backstory of how SoftBank came to be on your cap table, and what's the level of involvement from Masayoshi-san?
Yeah, absolutely, Michelle, and certainly that was a good milestone for us. But I think, as you know, a year back in 2019, I think May 2019, we closed our Series B, which was led by Sequoia, Mass Mutual Ventures, and co-led. But I think, especially since then, the company has been very focused on various milestones, right? All the way from regulatory milestones. We have 15 regulatory approvals in 6 different countries now within a matter of a year. We scaled up commercially. We had multiple clinical trials, products in the pipeline, really completing clinical trials and getting to the next stage of testing and validation. However, I think earlier this year, and I think we also made 3 acquisitions, as you know, in the past 1 year, and the teams tremendously started to grow. But because of the pandemic, there was this significant market opportunity ahead of us. The first of all is our standard business of how do you scale our existing digital therapeutics, patient monitoring, to keep patients away from hospital in this pandemic. But on the second hand, we also had a lot of opportunities, primarily in COVID. Everyone knows very little about the disease. So first and foremost was really about managing patients with COVID-19, either suspected or quarantined and infected. But a lot of pharma companies were trying to run clinical trials, and in some of them we were part of it. And for therapeutics trials, where we were really able to accelerate that whole development process for them by looking at novel digital endpoints to speed up these drug approval processes. Sometime earlier this year, we decided potentially we'll look at a fundraise, just to scale up our operations and commercial, especially in the US, as well as focusing opportunistically on Asia. And I think SoftBank has been tracking us for quite some time now, since 2019, end of 2019, when we had our first meeting with them. And since then, as we started scaling with all these milestones, they reached back to us. We started having conversations around the fundraise, and of course, with the team in Singapore, SoftBank's team in Singapore. But then I had multiple discussions, even with Masha Sishan, on the opportunity, right? Not just in the US, but how could we at the same time tap into the opportunity in Asia, Asia Pac, Japan, China. And I think there was a great synergy and bonding between our visions for the company, which aligned. And I think that's when we decided to raise $100 million. In fact, we were not anticipating raising that large amount, but eventually I think there was a very clear opportunity on what we would use the funds for and how that would accelerate our business.
What about you, Sandhya? I mean, Shiok Meats as also quite the stable of investors. You have your VCs, you have your strategics. What were your sort of first fundraising conversations like? I mean, did you have to sort of do a hard sell?
So interestingly, I think I keep saying this, if I'd started Shiok Meats, let's say 4 years back, we would have utterly failed probably, and we wouldn't have raised the money. I think it's the right time, the right place. So starting in 2018 in Singapore was the right decision. We are the first ever cell-based meat company in this part of the world, first ever cell-based meat company to work on crustaceans like shrimp, crab, lobster. I think we ticked the boxes on many firsts. And, being 2 Asian scientists who kind of quit their jobs and starting a company was kind of a hit as well among investors. We knew what we were talking about. We knew what we were doing. Me as a CEO, I knew exactly what was happening in the company, or what is happening in the company, to the cellular level, literally, pun intended. But I exactly know how cells are grown, what you feed them, how do you make them meats. Even though I don't do it on a daily basis, I do understand every part of the R&D and every part of the scientific side of things. So that really helps when you are speaking to investors. when we started off, it was literally starting off with an angel investor's check of $10,000. And I've known this person for the last 4 years. He's my mentor advisor. I also have started 2 other companies in the past, and he was an advisor for both those companies as well. So literally, Shiok Meets was ideated over a phone conversation with him. And his name is Ryan Bethencourt, and he put on the first check. And that kind of cascaded into him getting his network to invest in us. And then I'm I should, I'm very happy about this, but most of the funding that we have received till date is all incoming rather than us going and pitching out to them. So it has been investors reaching out to us. There's a huge boom of alternative proteins that's happening right now. It is the most happening thing in the world right now. So we have been, I would say, blessed to get some of the best impact investors, VCs, angels, and corporate investors come and join us. We just closed a Series A round in September this year as well, about 12.5 million US dollars. So we are the most valuable company right now in APAC with regards to alternative proteins or cell-based meats. We have raised a total of $20 plus million. I mean, but it is a very capital intensive company. So our next round would be north of $100 million, Kuldeep. So it'll be it'd be interesting to speak to you about how you did that and how SoftBank came in. That's a separate topic, but yeah, it's been a pretty interesting ride. I would say we get emails and contacts from investors that are extremely passionate about the sustainable food industry. And it's been pretty, I would say, not easy, but I would say less complex to explain to them why we are doing this. I think they already know the problem statement. They want to learn more about the solution and how we do it and how we want to scale up, rather than sticking on what is the problem, why are you trying to solve it?
Yes.
So yeah, it's an easy conversation to get into, but of course the technical aspects of it, we have to be translated into simple English for all of them to understand. Yeah.
What about the traditional industry players, whom you're disrupting? Maybe the shrimp farmers, what has been their response?
So honestly, I'd like to say this again. I mean, I try to bring this point home every time I have a conference or I'm speaking to someone is, honestly, at this point, we are not trying to disrupt the traditional industry. We are trying to work with them and add an additional food source. Because given that we need a tremendous amount of protein in the next 20 to 30 years, the existing industry is not able to cater to it, along with unsustainable practices and them not being able to cater to the current needs of the population. How are they going to cater to the explosion in the population in the next 20 to 30 years? So we are coming in as an additional food supply. And honestly, we want to enable these shrimp producers with our technology in the future. We don't want to close down anybody's doors or put anybody out of business. We want to change their business model or the way they produce shrimp currently using our technology. So one of the key reasons we ended up filing patent for our technology is so that we can license it in the future and help these companies adopt and adapt to these technologies. So we have already been speaking to large shrimp producers in Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, and so on, to see how they can collaborate with us for the future and enable themselves with a more sustainable technology to produce the same protein that they're producing right now, but in a very different way.
I think you said that you want at some point, maybe 10 years or more down the road, the regular lobster that, for example, that we have now would be actually more expensive than what you can produce, for example. I mean, wouldn't that be some serious impact on them?
For sure. So how we want to do that is not by shutting down shrimp or lobster farms. The idea is we want to make cell-based lobster and shrimp the mainstream. And then, of course, the conventional sort of lobster and shrimp will still be there for a couple of decades. It will take at least 15 to 20 years for that all to like completely go away. But the idea is that when you, as a consumer, when you walk into a supermarket, when you go to the frozen aisle, you'll see a huge space for cell-based products. Then next to that will be plant-based meat and seafood products. And next to that will be a small aisle of conventional lobster and shrimp or meat products that are going to be extremely highly priced, that the people won't opt for that. And they will actually opt for cell-based and plant-based meats, which are more affordable, healthier, sustainable, better for the environment. Soon enough, the conventional industry will slowly stop and it will close down as consumers it's always the consumers at the end of the day, right? It's us and the consumers that are making the decisions for businesses. It's not the businesses making the decisions for consumers. So we'd like consumers to go out there and have an option and choose which is the right one. And then eventually the not so right one will eventually close down and fade away.
Okay. We have just a couple of minutes left, and I really wanted to ask both of you, maybe Kuldeep, you can go first in terms of, so what is needed for you to really hit the next level? How far are you expecting to go in it? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I
What's the
think
goal?
certainly, Michelle. And I think, so far what we, if you look at Biofourmis, where we are in that trajectory, I think we are, a technology provider right now, right? Where we build, platforms to better manage patients, remotely. I think, in the next, I would say 12 to 24 months, our goal is really to transition from, or transition to being a global healthcare, tech-enabled healthcare provider. And what that really means is, really being able to take control and ownership of the patient, and really drive better outcomes for the patient, by also layering in clinical services, actual nurse practitioners, clinicians, and trying to make them much more efficient. So technically a virtual way of completely managing patients to drive, better outcomes. And really, right now, our concentration has been on pharma. Our goal is to transition that into, hospital systems, payers, gradually, and we have been seeing that, trend and trajectory. So far, the focus has been the US and will still continue to be the US as our priority. But we are looking at expanding into other markets in Asia, primarily Japan, to begin with, along with, of course, Southeast Asia, where we do a lot of work. So really, in the next, I would say 3 years, the goal is, how do we scale our commercial capabilities, operational capabilities, so that we can hit, that 1 million patient mark, so that we can continuously keep, providing better care to patients.
Thanks. Sandhya, what about for Shiok Meats? How are you going to hit the next level, and what do you expect from the coming year?
Yeah, so for us, our key milestones for the next, I would say, 18 months is to reduce the price and scale up the technology from the lab to an actual manufacturing plant. So we're actually in the midst of building or starting to build our first manufacturing plant for cell-based seafood in Singapore. So hence the Series A funding as well. But I think the main kind of milestone for us is to make sure that we have our product at least in 1 or 2 restaurants by the end of 2022. And that a handful of, or I would say a little more than 100 people are able to taste it in the first 1 week or so, and then we keep expanding from there. Yeah.
Great. Thank you both very much for taking the time to be with us today. We have Sandhya Sriram from Shiok Meats and Kuldeep from Biofourmis. Thank you again.
Thank you.